The ruins of the magnificent capital of the Aztecs today lie near the Cathedral of Mexico City. In the 15th and 16th centuries, this great temple was the seat of both religion and politics of the mighty, warlike Aztec people. Subject and allied cities would visit the temple regularly. The Aztecs' god, Huitzilopochtli, had promised his people a place where they would be the masters of a huge empire. In order to recognize this place, they had to find an eagle perched on a cactus, holding a serpent in its beak. They would then know that this was to be the special place where they would be lords and where their great capital, Tenochtitlan, would be built. Today, this site is known as Mexico City. The Mexico of the modern world looks with pride upon the symbols of its ancient past. The colors of the Mexican flag, green, white, and red, display at the center the eagle perched upon a cactus. The great temple of the Aztecs was originally a humble temple built in honor of both their god, Huitzilopochtli, and Chaloc, god of rain. But as the Aztec nation grew in importance and wealth, the building became more impressive, painted in bright colors, erected in what was considered to be the center of the mighty Aztec Empire. The roots of Aztec civilization reach deep into the past. Long before the birth of Christ, an Aztec culture was already emerging. A hieroglyphic writing had been developed, and their astronomers had begun to use the 52-year calendric cycle, which formed the basis of Aztec religion. Even at this early date, the ritual ball game, which became infamous throughout Mesoamerica, was being played. Long before the Aztecs appeared, the central part of Mexico was dominated by the city of Teotihuacan, only 45 kilometers away from the site which was later to become the Aztec capital. Teotihuacan was a great city, the sixth largest city in the world at that time, 600 AD. It remains one of the most impressive sites of the ancient world. It covered more than 13 square kilometers. At its center was an area of palaces and flat-topped pyramids, of which the so-called pyramids of the sun and moon are particularly outstanding. Extending the length of the city was the road known now as the Street of the Dead, which was more than 5 kilometers long. As Francisco Zepeda Alvarez explains,
I think which thus was the most important avenue here at Teotihuacan, because a lot of people from other areas, the Totonacos, possible Zapotecs, and some Aztecs came to this area to offer presents to the gods. The first constructions, the monumental constructions, we think which was built during the 1st century after Jesus Christ. See, we think which the first temple built it was the temple of the sun, then the temple of the moon, and they built the Street of the Dead. The population here, we think which was around 120,000 people.
various buildings depict gods and goddesses, who would later be worshipped in Aztec times. The mural paintings of Teotihuacan illustrate the importance of religion. Water, earth, and sea life are often represented. Ruben Cabrera, a Mexican archaeologist who has worked at Teotihuacan since 1980, explains the paintings in a palace built close to the site.
Este es el conjunto que le llaman Patio Blanco de Atetelco. Fue explorado en 1947 por el arqueólogo Carlos Margain y representa el complejo de 3 templos, característico de Teotihuacán en su disposición urbana, en su planeación, ya que estos se ubican hacia el norte, hacia el este y hacia el sur, según los 4 puntos cardinales. Representan 2 temas fundamentalmente. Aluden al sacrificio humano y también hablan de la guerra, del aspecto bélico. Como vemos, hay una procesión de 2 deidades, jaguares y coyotes, pero ambos personajes llevan simbólicamente devorando un corazón sangrante. Y de este lado es la procesión únicamente de coyotes, pero también llevan la lengua, la vírgula de la palabra. Y hay una serie de otros motivos que están aludiendo a puntas de proyectil, macanas, que están hablando de la guerra.
A remarkable stylistic feature of the Teotihuacan murals is their symbolistic complexity. What is interesting is the repetition of images throughout the temples, giving us an insight into religious practices and thoughts. In about 650 AD, Teotihuacan was overthrown, but remained as an important religious center, as it was believed that the gods had assembled there to create the sun. Moctezuma, the last Aztec ruler, made frequent pilgrimages to this site. The Aztecs also held dear to themselves the traditions passed down to them by their predecessors, the Toltecs, whose achievements were attributed to Quetzalcoatl, their great priest ruler. Shortly before 1200 AD, the Toltec state collapsed, and the Valley of Mexico became home to a succession of half-civilized tribes known collectively as Chichimecs. The last of the barbarian tribes to enter the Valley of Mexico was the Nahuatl-speaking group which we now know as the Aztecs, although they referred to themselves as the Mexican or the Tenochtitlan. Today, all that we know about the early days of the Aztecs has been passed down to us in the form of legends. It is rumored that the early Aztecs discovered the god Huitzilopochtli in a cave on a hillside. They then began a journey on his command to his birthplace at Coatepec, building temples in his honor whenever they stopped. The birth of Huitzilopochtli, the war god, is important, as he was considered to be a manifestation of the sun. To them, he represented the sun's eternal fight against the powers of darkness, a never-ending struggle reenacted daily. Just as Huitzilopochtli was born to combat his brother and sister, so the sun rises each morning to do fresh battle with the stars and moon and put them to flight. To help Huitzilopochtli, as the sun in his daily struggle, it was necessary for man to provide the god with the most precious food that he can offer, his own blood. As Dr. Elizabeth Baquedano explains,
we know about human sacrifice thanks to the descriptions of the 16th century friars who kept very meticulously records about human sacrifice. The most important friar who recorded everything he saw in terms of religion was Bernardino de Sahagún, who came to Mexico in 1539. We know that human sacrifice was important to keep the universe in equilibrium, but also we know that human sacrifice was the most precious offer we had to give to the gods. Children were also sacrificed. There were 3 paradises to which the souls of the victims went to. So the god of rain had special sacrifices as well, but the method of disposal of the body varied. So on the left-hand side we find decapitation. We have several offerings containing decapitated heads. We find decapitated individuals, both male, female, and children. But on the side of Tlaloc, we usually have children. The children cried before human sacrifice took place. And the more they cried, the better the omen for rain. The more rains, the better the season would be.
Sacrifice was of paramount importance to the Aztecs, for without the nourishment of human hearts and blood, it was thought that the sun would stop moving. The heads of the sacrificial victims were displayed in skull racks. These were architectural platforms, carved on all sides, seen here at the great temple of the Aztecs, where 240 different skulls are painted with stucco. They were horrific monuments which celebrated success in battle and intimidated their enemies.
The tradition of having skull racks dates to about 700 or 800 AD in Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, at the site called La Coyotera. But the Aztecs actually made it their own. You find skull racks depicted in the chroniclers of the 16th century. Even the heads of the Spaniards were displayed, and we have manuscripts showing the heads, the severed heads of the Spaniards, including horse heads, because the natives had not seen horses before. This particular example conveys ideas of fame, glory, prestige, and power. Although this example is a sculpted one, real skull racks were placed next to the temples. The temples had real heads, the flesh decayed, and the skull actually stayed behind.
The hearts of the sacrificial victims were placed in vessels called huauxicalli, eagle vessels. The great temple of the Aztecs was considered to be the center of their universe, and a bustling city soon grew around its steps. Avenues were built in a highly planned grid formation, and at its heyday, the city of Tenochtitlan was known to have over 200,000 inhabitants. Until recently, most of the Great Temple was known to us only through documentary sources. In 1978, a Mexican archaeologist and his colleagues unearthed the remains of the temple itself and caused a massive resurgence of interest in the Aztec civilization. The first has disappeared, but the second dates back to 1390, which is the one we see today, virtually complete. The later constructions were enclosed within successively larger buildings. These pyramids are dedicated to both the tribal god Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, and to the rain god Xalak. The temple represented the mythical place of Huitzilopochtli's birth, Coatepec, a serpent mountain, which is why the site is surrounded by walls representing snakes.